Today's briefing focuses on what intelligence sources describe as potentially the most catastrophic security breach of 2026. Leaked classified CIA satellite imagery, allegedly showing Chinese People's Liberation Army Air Force Y-20 strategic cargo aircraft conducting multiple clandestine flights into Iranian territory, carrying what image analysts assess to be nuclear weapons components or complete tactical nuclear warheads. According to multiple intelligence assessments that have reached this analysis through classified channels, the satellite surveillance detected at least 17 separate Y-20 cargo missions between January 15th and February 8th, 2026, following flight patterns specifically designed to avoid detection by Western radar networks and landing at heavily secured Iranian military installations rather than civilian airports. This is not routine Chinese-Iranian military cooperation. This is not conventional weapons transfers that have characterized previous Beijing-Tehran defense relationships. This represents what analysts characterize as potential nuclear proliferation of catastrophic proportions, where China may be directly providing Iran with nuclear weapons capabilities that could fundamentally alter Middle East power dynamics and trigger immediate American military response. The significance of this alleged satellite evidence cannot be overstated. If verified, Chinese provision of nuclear weapons to Iran would constitute the most serious violation of international non-proliferation norms since the nuclear age began, potentially triggering immediate American military strikes against both Iranian facilities and Chinese assets, fundamentally rupturing U.S.-China relations, and initiating regional nuclear arms races that could extend across the Middle East within months. The leaked satellite imagery reportedly shows Y-20 aircraft, China's largest strategic airlifter capable of transporting payloads exceeding 60 tons, landing at Iran's Shahid Nojeh airbase and multiple Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps facilities under extraordinary security conditions, including complete airspace closures, electronic warfare jamming to prevent surveillance, and immediate transfer of cargo into underground storage facilities using specialized handling equipment consistent with nuclear materials protocols. This briefing will examine several critical dimensions of this crisis. First, the specific satellite evidence that allegedly documents Chinese Y-20 nuclear transfers and the intelligence analysis supporting claims of nuclear weapons delivery. Second, the strategic rationale that might drive China to undertake such extraordinarily risky proliferation and the potential quid pro quo arrangements with Iran. Third, the immediate implications for American military planning and the likelihood of imminent strikes against both Chinese and Iranian targets. Fourth, the broader regional consequences, including potential Israeli unilateral action and Gulf state responses. And finally, what this crisis reveals about the complete breakdown of international non-proliferation architecture and the emergence of unrestricted great power competition where traditional constraints have entirely collapsed. According to intelligence reporting corroborated through multiple classified channels, the leaked CIA satellite surveillance detected the first suspicious Y-20 flight on January 15, 2026, when National Reconnaissance Office satellites tracked a Chinese strategic transport aircraft departing Urumqi Air Base in Xinjiang province on a southwestern trajectory toward Iranian airspace. The initial flight triggered automated alerts within CIA analysis systems because the Y-20 followed an unusual route, avoiding established commercial airways and international airspace, instead utilizing corridors over sparsely populated regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan, where radar coverage remains limited. Satellite tracking documented the aircraft landing at Iran's Shahid Nojeh airbase near Hamadan at approximately 0300 local time, remaining on the ground for only 90 minutes before departing on return trajectory to China. The intelligence analysis that generated crisis-level concern emerged from detailed examination of high-resolution satellite imagery captured during the Y-20's ground time at Iranian facilities. Image analysts reportedly identified specialized ground support equipment surrounding the aircraft, including heavy-duty cargo handling systems, radiation shielding containers, and security cordons extending over 500 meters from the aircraft, protocols that analysts assess as consistent with nuclear weapons handling rather than conventional military cargo. Thermal imaging satellites detected unusual heat signatures from the cargo transferred from the Y-20 into underground facilities, patterns that nuclear weapons specialists assess as potentially consistent with tritium decay heat generated by thermonuclear weapon components. Subsequent satellite surveillance documented 16 additional Y-20 missions following nearly identical patterns between January 15th and February 8th, with flights occurring at intervals of approximately 3 to 5 days and consistently landing during nighttime hours at the same heavily secured Iranian military installations. Intelligence analysts calculated the total cargo capacity transferred across 17 missions as potentially exceeding 1,000 tons, sufficient to transport dozens of complete tactical nuclear weapons, or hundreds of nuclear weapon components, including warheads, delivery systems, and associated technical equipment. The consistency of flight patterns, the extraordinary security measures observed at landing sites, and the thermal signatures detected during cargo handling created what analysts characterize as high-confidence assessment that nuclear materials were being transferred. Additional intelligence supporting the nuclear weapons transfer assessment reportedly includes signals intelligence collection, capturing Chinese military communications, referencing special cargo and strategic deliveries during timeframes coinciding with Y-20 flights, along with human intelligence reports from sources within Iranian military structures describing arrival of Chinese strategic systems requiring specialized handling by Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps personnel trained in nuclear weapons protocols. The convergence of satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and human source reporting created what CIA analysts assessed as compelling evidence, warranting immediate notification to senior policymakers, including President Trump, triggering emergency National Security Council meetings and preliminary planning for potential military responses. Intelligence analysts examining potential Chinese motivations for nuclear weapons proliferation to Iran have developed several competing hypotheses, none entirely satisfactory in explaining why Beijing would undertake actions carrying such catastrophic risks. The primary theory holds that China views Iranian nuclear armament as strategic counter to American military dominance in the Middle East, calculating that a nuclear-armed Iran would constrain Washington's freedom of action and force the United States to negotiate regional arrangements rather than imposing outcomes through military superiority. Under this theory, China accepts risks of nuclear proliferation in exchange for strategic benefits of constraining American power in a region critical to Chinese energy security. A second analytical framework suggests China may be responding to perceived American nuclear threats against Chinese interests, particularly regarding Taiwan. Intelligence assessments indicate Chinese strategic planners increasingly concerned that American willingness to contemplate nuclear use has grown under Trump administration, creating Chinese incentives to establish nuclear-armed allies capable of threatening American interests in retaliation for any American nuclear action against China. Providing Iran with nuclear capabilities creates mutual vulnerability where American nuclear threats against China could trigger Iranian nuclear responses against American allies, potentially deterring American nuclear coercion. Alternative theories examined by intelligence analysts include possibilities that the Y-20 flights were transporting nuclear-related technology and components rather than complete weapons, potentially providing Iran with accelerated pathways to indigenous nuclear weapons development, while maintaining Chinese deniability about direct proliferation. This framework would explain the satellite evidence while avoiding the most catastrophic implications of China directly handing operational nuclear weapons to Iranian military forces. However, analysts note that the distinction may be meaningless in practical terms, as providing components and technical assistance that enable rapid Iranian nuclear weapons assembly creates similar strategic consequences to direct weapons transfer. Economic motivations also feature in analytical assessments, with some intelligence specialists suggesting China may have negotiated massive energy supply agreements with Iran in exchange for strategic weapons assistance, securing guaranteed petroleum access for decades in return for nuclear capabilities that dramatically enhance Iranian regional power. China's energy security concerns, combined with Western sanctions limiting Iranian petroleum exports, create potential framework for transactions where Beijing trades strategic weapons for long-term resource access. However, analysts note that economic benefits alone appear insufficient to justify risks China would incur through nuclear proliferation, suggesting multiple motivating factors likely operate simultaneously. Intelligence reporting indicates the leaked satellite evidence triggered immediate activation of American military contingency planning for strikes against both Iranian facilities receiving Chinese nuclear deliveries and potentially against Chinese strategic assets involved in the proliferation operation. According to classified assessments, President Trump convened emergency National Security Council meetings on February 9, 2026, where military planners presented options ranging from limited strikes, destroying Iranian storage facilities containing Chinese-provided nuclear materials, to comprehensive operations targeting Chinese Y-20 aircraft, support infrastructure, and potentially strategic weapons facilities within Chinese territory itself. The most aggressive military options reportedly under consideration include immediate strikes against Iranian underground facilities where Chinese nuclear deliveries are believed stored, utilizing bunker-penetrating weapons to destroy materials before Iranian forces can disperse them to hardened sites throughout the country. Intelligence assessments suggest that window for effective strikes may be extremely narrow, as Iranian military forces would predictably move nuclear materials to secure locations once they detected American strike preparations. Military planners reportedly advocated for immediate action within 72 hours to maximize probability of destroying materials before dispersal, though such compressed timelines would limit diplomatic coordination and increase operational risks. Additional strike options under consideration reportedly include targeting Chinese Y-20 aircraft and support infrastructure to prevent additional nuclear transfer flights, potentially including strikes on Chinese air bases within Chinese territory where Y-20 units are stationed. Such operations would represent unprecedented escalation in U.S.-China military confrontation, potentially triggering broader conflict extending far beyond the immediate nuclear proliferation crisis. Military planners reportedly assess that strikes on Chinese territory would likely provoke Chinese military responses, potentially including attacks on American forces in the Pacific theater, raising possibilities of great power war that could escalate rapidly beyond anyone's control. Intelligence reporting suggests Trump administration divided between officials advocating immediate military action to prevent Iranian nuclear armament versus those urging diplomatic approaches that would minimize risks of broader U.S.-China conflict. Hawks within the administration reportedly argue that allowing Chinese nuclear proliferation to succeed would establish catastrophic precedent, encouraging additional proliferation to American adversaries, making immediate military response essential, regardless of escalation risks. Doves counter that military strikes could trigger exactly the great power conflict that nuclear proliferation risks are meant to deter, advocating instead for intensive diplomacy, potentially including direct Trump-Xi engagement to secure Chinese agreement to halt transfers and cooperate in recovering materials already delivered. Intelligence assessments indicate Israeli leadership received briefings on alleged Chinese nuclear transfers to Iran through intelligence-sharing channels, triggering immediate Israeli contingency planning for unilateral military action regardless of American decisions. Israeli strategic doctrine holds that Iranian nuclear weapons acquisition represents existential threat requiring military response at any cost. And intelligence reporting suggests Israeli military forces placed on highest alert levels with preparations for immediate strikes if American action appears insufficient or delayed. The prospect of Israeli unilateral strikes on Iranian facilities, potentially containing Chinese nuclear weapons, raises catastrophic escalation risks, as such operations could trigger Iranian retaliation against Israeli cities, potentially using the very nuclear capabilities Israeli strikes intended to destroy. Gulf Arab states, including Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, reportedly received intelligence briefings about Chinese-Iranian nuclear transfers through American diplomatic channels, triggering immediate demands for American security guarantees and potentially accelerating their own nuclear weapons programs. Intelligence assessments suggest Saudi Arabia maintains clandestine nuclear weapons development programs that could produce operational weapons within months if strategic decision were made to proceed, and Chinese nuclear proliferation to Iran would likely trigger immediate Saudi activation of these programs. The prospect of simultaneous Iranian and Saudi nuclear armament would fundamentally destabilize the Middle East, potentially triggering nuclear arms races extending to Egypt, Turkey, and other regional powers within years. Regional military positioning reflects the crisis atmosphere generated by proliferation concerns. Intelligence reporting documents unusual military movements by multiple regional powers, including Israeli mobilization of reserve forces, Saudi Arabia activating air defense systems to maximum alert levels, and UAE conducting emergency evacuation planning for major cities. The convergence of these indicators suggests regional actors are preparing for potential major conflict, triggered either by American-Israeli strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities or by Iranian decisions to demonstrate nuclear capabilities once weapons are operationally deployed. The window between nuclear weapons' arrival in Iranian territory and their operational deployment may be extremely narrow, forcing regional actors to prepare for multiple crisis scenarios simultaneously. The alleged Chinese nuclear weapons transfers to Iran represent complete breakdown of international non-proliferation architecture that has constrained nuclear weapons spread since the 1970s. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which China signed and ratified, explicitly prohibits nuclear weapon states from transferring nuclear weapons to non-nuclear weapon states under any circumstances. Chinese violations of these fundamental obligations would signal that major powers no longer consider themselves bound by non-proliferation commitments when strategic interests dictate otherwise, potentially triggering cascade of proliferation as other states conclude that only possessing nuclear weapons ensures security in lawless international environment. Intelligence analysts assess that successful Chinese nuclear proliferation to Iran would likely encourage North Korea to accelerate nuclear weapons exports to states willing to pay premium prices, potentially including terrorist organizations if payments were sufficient. Pakistani nuclear weapons programs could face renewed pressures to proliferate to Sunni Arab states seeking counters to Iranian nuclear capabilities, despite American efforts to secure Pakistani arsenals. Russian nuclear security protocols could face similar pressures as Moscow calculates whether maintaining non-proliferation commitments serves strategic interests or whether selectively proliferating to allies offers advantages in great power competition. The erosion of non-proliferation norms would create a security environment fundamentally different from that which has existed since World War II, where nuclear weapons spread could accelerate dramatically, and where nuclear use in regional conflicts becomes increasingly probable as more actors acquire capabilities and thresholds for employment decline. Intelligence assessments suggest that within a decade, dozens of states could possess nuclear weapons if current non-proliferation architecture continues collapsing, creating crisis management challenges that exceed any historical precedent, and where probability of nuclear weapons use approaches statistical inevitability given sufficient time and crisis scenarios. Despite the alarming nature of alleged satellite evidence, intelligence reporting indicates significant debate within the American intelligence community about whether available information conclusively demonstrates Chinese nuclear weapons transfers versus alternative explanations. Skeptical analysts note that satellite imagery alone cannot definitively identify cargo contents without additional intelligence streams, and that specialized handling equipment observed at Iranian facilities could potentially be employed for conventional strategic weapon systems, requiring careful handling rather than exclusively for nuclear materials. Some intelligence specialists suggest the Y-20 flights may be transporting advanced conventional weapon systems, including hypersonic missiles, advanced air defense systems, or sophisticated electronic warfare equipment that China wishes to provide Iran while maintaining operational security to prevent American interdiction. These alternative explanations would account for observed flight patterns and security measures while avoiding the most catastrophic implications of direct nuclear weapons proliferation. However, proponents of the nuclear transfer theory note that the totality of evidence, including thermal signatures, security protocols, and converging intelligence streams, creates high-confidence assessment that nuclear materials were transferred regardless of ambiguities in any single intelligence stream. The intelligence debate reflects broader challenges in assessing adversary intentions and capabilities based on incomplete information that characterizes modern intelligence analysis. The stakes involved in potential Chinese nuclear proliferation to Iran create pressures for worst-case assessments that assume most dangerous interpretations of ambiguous evidence, potentially driving policy responses based on scenarios that may not accurately reflect reality. Conversely, demands for conclusive proof before acting risk allowing catastrophic proliferation to succeed while intelligence communities debate evidentiary standards. This fundamental tension between acting on incomplete information versus waiting for certainty that may never arrive defines the crisis confronting American decision-makers as they determine appropriate responses to alleged Chinese nuclear transfers. The leaked CIA satellite evidence allegedly documenting Chinese Y-20 aircraft delivering nuclear weapons to Iran has placed the international system at a precipice where decisions made in coming hours and days could determine whether nuclear proliferation accelerates beyond control or whether decisive action prevents catastrophic outcomes. If the intelligence assessments are accurate and China has indeed provided Iran with nuclear weapons capabilities, the consequences extend far beyond the immediate Middle East crisis to fundamentally reshape global security architecture in ways that increase nuclear dangers for generations. The American response to this crisis will define whether international non-proliferation commitments retain any meaning or whether major powers now openly flout obligations whenever strategic calculations dictate. Military strikes against Iranian facilities and potentially Chinese assets carry enormous escalation risks, but may represent only mechanism to prevent Iranian nuclear armament if diplomatic approaches fail. The alternative of accepting Iranian nuclear weapons as accomplished fact creates different but equally severe risks of regional nuclear arms races and heightened conflict probabilities. What remains tragically clear is that the international system has reached a point where traditional diplomatic mechanisms appear unable to constrain great power behavior. Non-proliferation architecture is collapsing under pressure of strategic competition, and the probability of nuclear weapons use in regional conflicts increases as more actors acquire capabilities and crisis management challenges multiply beyond historical precedents. Whether the current crisis leads to immediate military conflict, extended diplomatic confrontation, or grudging acceptance of new nuclear realities will shape international security for decades. The satellite footage that allegedly shows Chinese Y-20 aircraft delivering nuclear weapons to Iran may represent the moment when the post-World War II nuclear order finally collapsed, ushering in an era of unrestricted proliferation and vastly elevated nuclear dangers.